I used to believe silence meant peace in a marriage. I woke before my wife, made coffee, checked her calendar, and shaped my day around hers. "You don't have to do that," she'd say, distracted. "I want to," I'd answer, smiling. I believed love was service. I believed stability meant staying quiet when things felt off. At dinner I'd ask, "How was work?" She'd reply, "Busy," and scroll. I told myself seasons change. I told myself she still chose me. That night felt ordinary. I came home late, keys soft in my hand, shoes off by the door. I heard her voice from the study. She sounded lighter. I paused. "I miss you," she said. My chest tightened. I waited for my name. I heard another man breathe through the speaker. "I think about you all the time," she whispered. I leaned against the wall. "You shouldn't say that," he said. She laughed, warm and sure. "I can't help it," she replied. "With you I feel seen." I pressed my palm to my mouth. I told myself I misunderstood. I told myself she meant a friend. "Does he know?" he asked. She answered fast. "No." The room spun. "I don't want to hurt him," she added. My knees locked. Hurt was already here. I listened anyway, cruel and desperate. "I feel alive with you," she said. "I haven't felt that in years." I swallowed. Years included me. He said my wife's name, softly, like a promise. She breathed, "I love you." The word landed like glass. I remembered mornings, anniversaries, the way I folded her clothes. I remembered saying, "We're good," when I felt lonely. I whispered, "No," to the empty hall. He said, "We should be careful." She replied, "I know. I'm just tired of pretending." My heart argued. Pretending was what I did to survive. I stepped back, careful not to creak the floor. My phone buzzed. I silenced it with shaking fingers. I wanted to burst in. I wanted to ask why I wasn't enough. I wanted her to see me bleeding. Instead, I stood there. I listened until my legs hurt. When the call ended, she sighed, content. I moved to the bathroom, locked the door, and stared at myself. "You're fine," I told my reflection. "You're overthinking." She passed the hallway humming. "You're home?" she called. "Yeah," I said, steady. "Long day?" she asked. "Long," I answered. She kissed my cheek. Her lips felt familiar and foreign. In bed, she turned away. "Good night," she said. "Good night," I echoed. My mind replayed her voice behind the door. I learned betrayal doesn't shout. It speaks softly and lets you listen. I didn't confront her. I didn't cry. I didn't sleep. I carried the truth like a weight I couldn't set down. Something cracked that night. I walked away inside myself, knowing my marriage had already left me. I lay awake, counting breaths, counting lies. "You're imagining it," I told myself. "She loves you." The ceiling stared back. I pictured her smile on the call. I pictured my name missing from her mouth. I rehearsed questions. "Are we okay? Do you still want this?" Every question felt smaller than the answer. Silence answered first. My heart said, "Pay attention." My pride said, "Wait." I waited, listening to the clock judge me. It ticked on, patient, certain. I wasn't ready to break. I stayed, breathing, choosing fear over truth. Morning came anyway. She stretched, smiled, and said, "Coffee?" I nodded. "You look tired," she added. "Work," I replied. She accepted it easily. "Tonight's late," she said. "Meeting." "Okay," I answered. I wanted to say, "Stay." I wanted to say, "Choose me." I said nothing. She left humming. The door closed. I whispered, "I hear you." The house heard me. My chest felt hollow, like a room cleared for guests. I stood there, loyal to a promise already broken by truth. I picked up my keys, shaking, slower now, awake. That was the night my life tilted. I didn't shout. I didn't plead. I learned listening can change you. I chose quiet because noise wouldn't save me. "Tomorrow," I promised. "Not today." I walked past the door, past love I couldn't keep. I carried the truth into darkness, steady, burning. I was still a husband. I was still a man. But something essential loosened. I felt it slip. I let it go. The voice behind the door followed me. I kept walking, cracked, awake, unchanged, undone, alive, alone, honest, ready. I woke up before her again, staring at the ceiling, replaying her voice like a wound that refused to close. "I love you," she had said, not to me. At breakfast she smiled, poured coffee, and asked, "Did you sleep?" I nodded. "Fine." The lie tasted bitter. She buttered toast and said, "Big day today." I answered, "Same as always." I watched her hands, calm and sure, and wondered how she could hold two truths at once. Anything you want to talk about? I asked careful. She glanced up. Like what? I shrugged. Us. She laughed softly. We're good. I said, you seem far lately. She replied, work is heavy. I asked, late again tonight? She didn't miss a beat. Meeting. The word pressed on my chest. I tried again. With who? She smiled. Team. I nodded, invisible. At work my phone stayed quiet. I sent a message. No reply. Hours passed. My mind filled the silence. I remembered nights she turned her screen away. I remembered new passwords. I remembered saying, I trust you, like a prayer. A coworker asked, you okay? I said, busy. I watched myself disappear. That evening she came home humming. You're early, I said. Cancelled, she answered. My heart jumped. I hated the hope. Want dinner? I asked. Later, she said, already typing. I leaned against the counter. Who are you texting? She didn't look up. Client. I said, your smile looks different. She paused. You're imagining things. I felt small. I tested the truth gently. Do you still love me? She sighed. Why would you ask that? I said, because I miss you. She replied, you're overthinking. The room felt tight. I said, when did we stop talking? She said, we talk. I whispered, not like before. She said, people change. In the shower I pressed my forehead to the tile. What did I do wrong? I asked myself. When did I become replaceable? I listed my failures like receipts. Too quiet. Too patient. Too safe. I remembered her laugh behind the door. I remembered my name missing. The other man stayed unseen, but he sat between us. In bed I reached for her. She rolled away. I'm tired, she said. Okay, I answered. I stared at the dark and argued with my fear. Confront her, one voice said. Wait, said another. Hope whispered, she'll come back. Denial nodded. Pride stayed silent. The next morning she kissed my cheek. Don't be late, she said. I smiled. I won't. As the door closed I said aloud, I'm still here. The house didn't answer. I understood then that betrayal doesn't explode. It tightens slowly until breathing hurts. I was the only one still holding on, fighting for something already slipping away. At lunch I called her. Just checking in, I said. She replied, can I call you later? I asked, are you with him? Silence answered first. Then she said, you're being unfair. I said, I'm being honest. She said, I don't have time for this. The line went dead. My hands shook. I told myself, calm down. I failed. That night I cooked her favorite meal. You didn't have to, she said. I answered, I wanted to. We ate quietly. I said, remember our first apartment? She smiled. It was tiny. I said, we were happy. She said, we were young. I asked, does that mean it's gone? She looked at her plate. Things change. I said, love shouldn't vanish. She replied, love evolves. The words felt rehearsed. I pushed once more. Is there someone else? She stiffened. Why are you doing this? I said, because I'm drowning. She stood. I need air. The door closed. I sat alone, counting seconds, bargaining with memories. When she returned, she avoided my eyes. We'll talk later, she said. I nodded. Inside something folded. I realized I wasn't fighting her. I was fighting reality. The confession I heard had already chosen a future without me. I went to bed knowing the truth had moved in, and I was the last to accept it. I whispered to the ceiling, I won't beg. My voice sounded new. I promised myself patience, not weakness. Tomorrow I would watch, listen, and learn. Tonight I would survive. I turned on my side, leaving space between us, understanding that love can lie, smile, and still leave you alone. Sleep came late, carrying questions I could no longer silence. I stayed awake, counting breaths, accepting that truth hurts less than living inside lies. Finally, I met him by accident at the cafe near the office, the one she once called quiet and safe. He asked, is this seat taken? I said, no. He smiled and Saturday, thanks. I nodded and wrapped my fingers around my cup to steady them. He said, long day? I answered, always. He laughed. Tell me about it. His phone buzzed and he checked it without shame. He said, she worries when I'm late. My breath stopped. I said, lucky woman. He shrugged. She doesn't feel lucky anymore. I asked, why not? He stirred sugar slowly. Her marriage is cold. I said, that's rough. He leaned closer. She's trapped. I asked, trapped how? He said, duty, routine, silence. I swallowed and tasted metal. He continued, I listened to her. I said, listening matters. He smiled. Exactly. He added, her husband stopped seeing her years ago. I said, people miss things sometimes. He replied, some choose not to look. I asked, what do you want from her? He answered, happiness. I asked, at any cost? He paused. Love costs risk. I said, and damage? He frowned. No one is damaged here. My chest burned, but I stayed quiet. He said, she deserves more than silence. I said, more than promises too? He said, more than neglect. I asked, do you know him at all? He said, only the stories she tells. I said, stories can lie. He laughed. Pain doesn't. He checked his watch. I should go. I said, does she know where this leads? He replied, she knows her heart. I said, he might still be trying. He said, trying came too late for them. He stood. Nice talking to you. I said, you too. He left without looking back. I stayed seated, breathing through the ache. I didn't say my name. I didn't claim my place. I listened, learned, and let the truth settle in my bones. I walked outside and said to myself, I stayed silent. The words felt sharp but steady. I chose peace over honesty. Cars passed. I said, love without respect fails. My phone buzzed. Her message read, running late. I typed, okay. I stood there and whispered, I let this happen. The air felt colder. I taught her I would wait. I remembered nights I nodded instead of asking. I remembered smiling instead of speaking. I said, that ends now. I replayed his words again. Trapped. Cold. Silence. I asked myself, when did I become the story she escaped? I answered, when I stopped demanding respect. The answer hurt, but it cleared the fog. I walked past the cafe window and caught my reflection. I said, you're still here. I said, you still matter. My phone buzzed again. She wrote, don't wait up. I typed, I won't. I understood then that pain can teach faster than love. I wasn't losing her in that moment. I had already lost myself long before. I said aloud, no more hiding. I said, no more silence. Each word felt like a step back into my body. I walked home lighter, carrying pain but also resolve. I knew I wouldn't confront her tonight. I knew I wouldn't beg. I would watch, prepare, and speak when my voice was steady. I crossed the street and promised myself this truth. Love without respect is already over, and I would never accept being invisible again. I sat across from her at the kitchen table and said, I heard you. She didn't ask what I meant. She said, how much? Enough, I replied. She folded her hands. Then say it. I heard you tell him you loved him. She exhaled slowly. I was wondering when this would happen. I asked, why didn't you stop? She said, because it felt honest. I nodded. Honest about what? She looked at the window. About being lonely. I said, you were never alone. She answered, I felt unheard. I leaned back and said, I asked you every night. She replied, you asked but you didn't listen. I said, I listened to silence. She said, silence was all I had left. I asked, so you chose him? She said, I chose how I felt with him. I kept my voice steady. Free? She nodded. Free. I said, free to lie? She answered, free to breathe. I asked, and me? She said, you became routine. I let that settle and said, do you regret it? She paused. I regret hurting you. I asked, do you regret loving him? She looked at me. No. That answer cut deeper than anger ever could. I said, so if I hadn't heard you? She replied, we would still be here. I asked, smiling? She said, trying? I said, trying to pretend? She whispered, trying to survive. I studied her face and said, you didn't fight for us. She said, I was tired of fighting alone. I answered, I was fighting quietly. She shook her head. Quiet felt like absence. I asked, did you plan to leave? She said, I planned to feel alive. I said, at my expense. She answered, I didn't think of it that way. I said, that's the problem. She leaned forward. What do you want now? I said, the truth. She said, you have it. I replied, then hear mine. She waited. I said, I won't compete. She frowned. Compete? I said, for my own wife. She said, I never asked you to. I answered, you didn't have to. She said, so what are you saying? I said, I won't beg. She said, I didn't expect you to. I replied, I won't forgive what you don't regret. She looked down. I said, love forced is humiliation. She whispered, I didn't mean to humiliate you. I answered, intent doesn't erase impact. She said, I'm being honest now. I said, honesty after betrayal is convenience. She asked, can we fix this? I said, fix requires two people choosing each other. She said, I don't know what I choose. I nodded. That's my answer. The room felt quiet, not empty. I stood and said, I won't scream. She asked, then what will you do? I said, leave with dignity. She said, you're giving up. I replied, I'm letting go. I walked toward the door and said, staying would erase me. She said my name softly. I didn't turn back. In that moment, I understood that love without respect isn't love, and staying would cost me the last piece of myself I still owned. I sat across from her again and said, I've been thinking. She crossed her arms. About what? About us, I replied. She laughed nervously. You already know where I stand. I nodded. That's why I'm talking. She said, if this is another talk about fixing things? I interrupted gently. It's not. She paused. Then what is it? I said, I won't keep you trapped. Her eyes narrowed. Trapped. I answered, in a marriage you don't want. She leaned back. I never said that. I said, you said you felt free with him. She opened her mouth, then closed it. I continued, people don't need freedom from what they love. She whispered, so what are you saying? I said, I'm letting you go. She stared at me. You're what? I'm offering a divorce, I said calmly. She blinked. Just like that. I nodded. Without fights. Without blame. She asked, is this a trick? I replied, no. It's respect. She shook her head. I thought you'd be angry. I said, I was. She asked, then why are you so calm? I answered, because anger keeps me tied to pain. She said, you're really doing this? I replied, yes. She looked confused. You're not even trying. I said, I tried for years. She said, you're giving up too easily. I looked at her. You mistake peace for weakness. She had no answer. She asked, what will people think? I said, that's no longer my burden. She asked, and me? I replied, you'll be free. Her voice softened. That's what you think I want? I said, it's what you chose. Silence sat between us. She finally said, I didn't expect this. I answered, I know. She said, I thought you'd beg. I said, I won't compete with another man. She looked away. That night I called a lawyer. He said, are you sure? I replied, I've never been more certain. He said, we'll start with paperwork. I answered, I want it clean. He asked, any disputes? I said, no. He said, that's rare. I replied, so is choosing dignity. He paused. I'll prepare everything. At home she watched me pack documents. She asked, you're serious? I said, I told you. She asked, where will you go? I replied, somewhere quiet. She said, you planned this fast. I answered, I planned it slowly without knowing. She said, I didn't think you'd actually leave. I looked at her. That's why I have to. She said, you're punishing me. I replied, I'm protecting myself. She frowned. From me? I nodded. Yes. I separated accounts. I listed assets. She asked, do we have to do this now? I said, delay only makes it cruel. She whispered, I feel like I lost something. I answered, so did I. She said, what if I change my mind? I looked at her carefully. That question came too late. She said, you don't love me anymore? I replied, I love myself enough now. She grew quiet. I never wanted to hurt you. I said, intent doesn't undo damage. She said, you're so different. I answered, this is who pain taught me to be. When the papers were ready, I slid them across the table. She stared. You already signed. I nodded. So you wouldn't feel chased. She said, you're giving me everything I asked for. I replied, yes. She asked, and what do you get? I said, my name back. She looked confused. I added, my self-respect. As I packed my last bag, she said, I don't know if this is right. I answered, freedom never feels comfortable at first. She watched me walk away. Outside, I breathed deeply. I wasn't winning her. I was choosing myself. I woke up to silence again. The apartment felt emptier than ever, as if the walls had swallowed every trace of us. I made coffee without thinking, staring out the window at a city that kept moving while I felt frozen. My phone buzzed. Hey man, want to grab breakfast? It was Lucas. I sighed. Yeah, I'll come down. At the diner, Lucas grinned. You look like hell. I smirked weakly. I'm embracing the aesthetic. He chuckled. Come on, tell me you're okay. I shrugged. I'm surviving. He shook his head. You've been replaced, man. That's rough. I nodded, stirring my coffee. Yeah, she's moved on faster than I thought. He leaned forward. You're not broken. Just recalibrating. I managed a smile. Recalibrating. Sounds nicer than pathetic. Later, I walked the park, listening to people laugh, couples holding hands. Each smile was a reminder. I muttered to myself, it's just life. Not the end of me. Lucas called again. You doing okay tonight? I said, I'll manage. Alone mostly. He paused. You know you can talk, right? I replied, I'm talking to myself for now. He laughed. Classic you. I smiled faintly. Better than crying in public. At work, I sat in my office reorganizing files, checking emails. Every task was small, but each one felt like reclaiming a piece of my day. A coworker, Mia, stopped by. You've been quiet. I said, adjusting. She nodded. Need help? I shook my head. No thanks. In the evening, I cooked for one, listening to old music we used to play. Each note cut like memory, yet I kept stirring the pot. This is life now, I whispered. Just me. A friend texted. Heard she's flaunting her new relationship. I froze. Yeah, I know. Does it hurt? I paused. It did. Now, it just reminds me of what I chose, peace over chasing what wasn't mine anymore. I went for a jog. Every step felt heavy at first, then lighter. I thought I survived this far. I can keep going. At dinner, Lucas asked again, any dates? I laughed softly. Not yet. I'm not ready. He said, healing comes first. I nodded. Yeah. I have to like me before anyone else does. Before bed, I journaled. I lost a wife, not myself. I lost comfort, not strength. Walking away doesn't mean I'm empty, it means I'm refusing to bleed forever. Lying in silence, I realized the apartment didn't feel so cold. The memories didn't sting as sharply. Pain was still there, but so was clarity. I whispered to myself, I'm stronger than I think. I called Lucas. Thanks for checking in. He said, anytime. You'll get through this. I smiled, a real one this time. Yeah, I will. Before sleep, I looked around my apartment and muttered, this is my life now. Alone maybe, but mine. I didn't feel whole yet, but I felt steady. I didn't win her back. I didn't want to. I just wanted me. I noticed the shift before she reached out. Rumors, whispers, half-heard conversations in mutual circles. I didn't ask for them, but I heard anyway. My phone buzzed unexpectedly. Can we talk? It was her. My chest tightened, but I stayed calm. I typed back, sure. Where? Cafe near your office? I agreed. Sitting across from her, I observed. She looked smaller somehow, unsure. I wanted to see you, she began. Why now? I asked evenly. She bit her lip. Things aren't perfect. He's pulling away. I don't know what to do. I kept my face neutral. I see. She looked down at her cup, twisting it nervously. I thought I knew what I wanted. But I didn't consider the trust, the routine, the stability. I nodded slowly. And you're realizing it now. Her eyes lifted, searching mine. I made mistakes. Can we talk like we used to? I let silence stretch. Talk like we used to? You left me, remember? Not me leaving you. I'm listening, yes, but it's not the same. She swallowed hard. I know. I miss your advice, your perspective. You were always clear-headed. I didn't see it then. I sipped my coffee. Clear-headed enough to see when to walk away. That hasn't changed. She looked flustered. I didn't expect you to be so calm. I shrugged. Calm isn't approval. It's just perspective. I've realized I don't need your regret to validate myself. She frowned. You don't? I shook my head. No. I survived without you. I'm stronger than I was before. And I don't need your apologies to prove it. Her lips pressed together. I thought he was everything. But now I see, maybe I chose poorly. I raised an eyebrow. And that's why you're here? I wanted, maybe, guidance. Or to see if you still cared. I leaned back, letting her words settle. Caring doesn't mean returning. Caring doesn't erase what's done. I've moved on in my own way. Her fingers fiddled with her napkin. You're different, stronger. I didn't expect that either. Life changes people, I said softly. And sometimes we have to experience loss to understand value. Yours wasn't mine to define anymore. She looked up, eyes glistening. I regret how I treated you. Maybe I don't deserve your forgiveness. I smiled faintly, not cruelly. Forgiveness isn't always required. Silence can be its own answer. Her head bowed. I never realized. I missed too much. I nodded. And I never needed to remind you. You learned on your own. That's what life does. Karma doesn't knock, it waits. She hesitated. Will you forgive me someday? I shook my head slowly. That's not my burden. My life isn't about holding grudges or absolving guilt. I live for me now. That's enough. She let out a shaky breath. I see. I stood. Take care of yourself. Learn from this. That's all you can do. Outside I watched her leave. The cafe was emptying, the world moving on. I felt no triumph, no lingering bitterness. Only quiet satisfaction. I had chosen myself when no one else did. Later Lucas called. You met her? Yes. I paused. She's learning slowly. And I'm free. He laughed. Finally. I looked out at the city, feeling weight lift. Free doesn't mean happy. It means unshackled. I waited at the park bench where we had first met years ago, the place we once called ours. When she appeared, I noticed the hesitation in her step, the way her eyes searched mine before settling. I wanted to see you one last time, she said softly. I nodded, keeping my tone steady. I figured this might happen eventually. She sat beside me, hands folded in her lap. I made mistakes. I know that now. I can't undo them, but I want to try. Can we go back? I exhaled slowly. Go back? Do you even hear yourself? Betrayal isn't erased by saying sorry. She looked down. I thought love could survive anything. I see now that I was wrong. Love? I asked, my voice quiet but firm. You didn't just break trust, you shattered it. And trust isn't something you can rebuild with words alone. She swallowed, voice trembling. I understand. I truly do. But, can we at least try? Pretend for a moment that we can go back to before? I shook my head. I didn't leave because I stopped loving you. I left because I began respecting myself. That respect doesn't come back with excuses or promises. Her eyes glistened. You make it sound so easy. It's not easy, I said. It's necessary. I realized that love without accountability is meaningless. You were never accountable, not fully. And I can't anchor my life to someone who refuses to face their choices. She flinched slightly, like the truth struck deeper than she expected. I never thought about it that way. I thought love would forgive everything. It doesn't, I replied gently. It forgives mistakes if there's effort, honesty, and change. But you never tried until now. And now it's too late. I've moved on in my own way. Her lips quivered. Do you hate me? I shook my head. Hate is useless. I feel nothing but clarity. Closure doesn't require hatred. It requires understanding what you will and won't accept. I never realized, she whispered. I placed my hand over hers for a brief moment. You realize it now, but realizing late doesn't undo the past. You have to live with your choices just as I live with mine. She drew in a shuddering breath. I'm sorry for everything. Truly. I know, I said. And your apology matters less than your reflection. That's all that counts now. Her shoulders slumped. So, this is it? Yes, I said softly. It's final. No reconciliation, no pretending. Just life moving forward, separately. She looked at me one last time, a mix of regret and acceptance in her eyes. I hope you find peace. I have, I said, standing. Because I chose myself. She nodded and I walked away. No anger, no lingering hurt, just quiet resolution. The park smelled of autumn and the air felt lighter. Freedom isn't about winning over others, it's about reclaiming yourself. I glanced back once. She was still sitting there, smaller than I remembered, facing the truth too late. I smiled faintly, A gesture without warmth or malice, just acknowledgement. The world didn't pause. Life continued around me, indifferent, yet full of opportunity. I had closure not because she gave it but because I took it. Walking away I felt my chest unclench. Love without respect isn't love. I had learned that. And now I was free. I wake up to silence, the kind that doesn't press down but lets you breathe. Months have passed since everything fell apart, and yet I can still feel the weight I once carried. I used to define myself by her choices, by what I lost, by the betrayal that cut through my life like a knife. But not anymore. I sit at the window, coffee in hand, watching the city wake up. I tell myself quietly, I survived this. I'm still standing. I'm still me. A friend calls. Hey, wanna grab lunch? Sure, I say, smiling. I feel like celebrating the little wins. She laughs softly. You're sounding different. Calmer. I am, I admit. I've learned that anger and regret are heavy chains. I had to let them go. Doesn't it sting thinking about her? It did, I reply honestly. But the sting has faded. I realize that holding on to bitterness only prolongs suffering. I chose myself instead. At work, I handle decisions with a level I never had before. I don't move to prove anything to anyone, not to her, not to anyone else. I move because it's right, because it's mine, because I finally respect myself enough to demand clarity in my life. My assistant says, you're different these days. Not the old you. I nod. I'm not the old me. I'm the me who knows what I'm worth, who won't settle for anything less than respect. Evenings are quiet but not lonely. I read, I exercise, I plan. I reflect on past mistakes, not to dwell but to understand. Each reflection strengthens me. I realize survival doesn't just mean living, it means thriving despite what tried to break you. Sometimes memories surface. I hear her voice, her laughter, the words she said to someone else. But instead of pain, I feel perspective. I survived, I grew, I reclaimed my life. Those memories are now lessons, not wounds. I meet a friend for coffee. You seem at peace, she observes. I am, I say simply. Peace isn't found in the absence of betrayal. It's found in choosing yourself when others choose differently. I didn't destroy anyone. I didn't chase revenge. I simply walked away. She nods, understanding. That takes strength. It does, I admit. And it takes time. I'm not bitter, not broken. I'm stronger, calmer, and finally emotionally grounded. Night comes and I sit on my balcony, city lights reflecting in my eyes. I think of everything I've endured, the betrayal, the loss, the loneliness. And yet I feel gratitude, for clarity, for growth, for the chance to redefine myself. I whisper to no one, I am not defined by what happened to me. I am defined by the choices I made afterward. I used to chase validation, approval, or answers from her. Not anymore. I seek nothing outside myself. I've learned that power isn't about revenge, it's about self-respect. I've reclaimed both quietly and completely. The world continues around me, indifferent and alive. And I continue too, with dignity, peace, and a quiet strength that no betrayal can touch. I'm not the man who was hurt. I am the man I chose to be.